I had a boyfriend, a perfectly planned life. Then she walked in ripped jeans, a guitar, and storm gray eyes that didn't just see me, they unraveled me. By the time she whispered my name in the steam, everything I thought I knew about myself was already on fire. Let's uncover what really happened. I had a boyfriend, a perfectly nice, perfectly boring boyfriend named Tom. I like Tom. I thought I loved Tom in the way you think you love the familiar comfort of your childhood teddy bear, dependable and always there. And I knew with the unshakable certainty of an 18-year-old who had never questioned the script handed to her at birth that I was straight. Unequivocally, unmessily, predictably straight. My life was a series of check boxes. Good grades, check. Polite manners, check. Sensible future plans, check. Attraction to boys, double check. It was a neat, orderly existence, a well-tended garden where everything grew in its designated row. Then she moved into my dorm room, and the first tremor of an earthquake I didn't even know was possible ran through the carefully cultivated soil of my life. Her name was Kara. I'd seen it on the roommate assignment email, a simple, unadorned name that gave no hint of the quiet chaos she would unleash within me. I'd arrived a day early, eager to claim the better bed, the desk with the less wobbly leg, to arrange my meticulously labeled belongings in a way that screamed organized and ready for academic success. The room was small, depressingly beige, with two identical, slightly battered wooden desks, two narrow beds with thin plastic-covered mattresses, and a shared closet that looked like it would barely hold one person's wardrobe, let alone two. I'd chosen the bed by the window, hoping for a sliver of a view that wasn't just the brick wall of the adjacent building. I was halfway through unpacking my color-coded notebooks when the door creaked open and she walked in, a duffel bag slung over one shoulder, a battered guitar case in her other hand, her dark hair falling in artless, captivating waves around a face that seemed both ancient and impossibly young. She wasn't conventionally beautiful, not in the glossy magazine way I was used to. Her features were stronger, more angular, her mouth a little too wide, her eyes a startling, stormy gray that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. There was a smudge of what looked like ink on her cheekbone and a tiny silver hoop in her left nostril that glinted when she moved. She didn't apologize for being late, didn't offer a flurry of excuses. She just stood there for a moment, taking in the room, taking in me, her gaze direct, unreadable, and utterly unsettling. "Kara," she said, her voice a low, slightly husky contralto that sent an unexpected shiver down my spine. It wasn't a question, more a statement of fact. "Lena," I replied, my own voice sounding ridiculously high-pitched and girlish in comparison. I offered a tentative smile, the kind I reserved for meeting my parents' more eccentric friends. She didn't smile back, not exactly, but the corner of her wide mouth quirked up just a fraction, a fleeting, enigmatic expression that I would come to know and obsess over in the weeks and months that followed. She dropped her duffel bag onto the remaining bed with a thud that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards, then leaned her guitar case against the wall. She moved with an easy, unstudied grace, a languid fluidity that was both captivating and, for some reason I couldn't yet articulate, deeply unnerving. I found myself watching her, my carefully planned unpacking forgotten. She was wearing ripped black jeans, a faded band t-shirt I didn't recognize, and scuffed combat boots that looked like they had seen more of the world than I ever would. She smelled faintly of old books and something else, something spicy and vaguely exotic, like cinnamon or cloves, a scent that was so different from the fruity body sprays and vanilla lotions that usually permeated the girls' dorms. It was a scent that made me want to lean in just a little closer, to breathe her in, a thought so alien, so unwelcome, that I immediately pushed it away, a hot flush creeping up my neck. My first impression of Kara was one of contained wildness, of a quiet, self-possessed energy that seemed to hum just beneath the surface. She didn't fill the room with chatter, didn't try to impress, didn't seem to care what I or anyone else thought of her. She simply was, and that, I was beginning to realize, was more potent, more disruptive than any amount of overt flamboyance could ever be. She began to unpack her movements, economical, almost minimalist. No color coded notebooks for her, just a few battered paperbacks, a sketch pad, a tin of charcoal pencils, and a surprising number of small, smooth stones that she arranged on her windowsill like tiny silent sentinels. I tried to make small talk, the kind of inane, get to know you chatter that was expected in these situations. So, what's your major? I asked, my voice overly bright. Undeclared, she replied, without looking up from a tangled knot of charging cables she was attempting to unravel. Her voice, that low, husky timbre, vibrated through me again, settling somewhere deep in my stomach, a strange, unsettling warmth. Oh, I said, feeling a ridiculous surge of disappointment. I was an English major, a fact I usually announced with a certain degree of pride, but suddenly it felt a pedestrian. Predictable. Cool. She finally untangled the cables and glanced at me, that enigmatic half-smile flickering across her lips again. And you? English lit? I said, trying to inject some enthusiasm into my voice. Love a good story. Me too, she said, her gray eyes holding mine for a moment longer than was strictly necessary, especially the ones that don't have neat endings. The air in the small room suddenly felt thick, charged with an unspoken something that I couldn't name, but that made my skin prickle, my pulse quicken. I quickly looked away, busying myself with arranging my pens in a perfectly straight line on my desk, a desperate attempt to regain some semblance of order in a world that was rapidly beginning to feel tilted. This was just a roommate, I told myself. A slightly unconventional, undeniably intriguing roommate, but a roommate nonetheless. There was no reason for this strange, fluttering sensation in my chest. No reason for the heat that was still warming my cheeks. I was straight. I had Tom. My life was on a predetermined, perfectly acceptable track. And Kira, with her stormy gray eyes and her spicy, unsettling scent, was just a temporary variable, a minor deviation in the carefully plotted equation of my existence. Or so I desperately, foolishly tried to convince myself, even as the first cracks were already beginning to appear in the foundations of my carefully constructed world. The initial days of sharing that cramped dorm room with Kara were an exercise in subtle observation and an increasing, unwelcome internal awareness. On the surface, our cohabitation settled into a reasonably amicable rhythm. We developed a silent understanding about shared spaces, about noise levels, about whose turn it was to brave the communal showers first in the morning. But beneath that veneer of polite coexistence, a different kind of dynamic was unfolding, at least within me. I found myself watching her, not in a creepy, voyeuristic way, or so I told myself, but with a kind of fascinated, almost anthropological curiosity. She was so different from anyone I had ever known, a creature of quiet contradictions and an effortless, unstudied allure that I found both captivating and deeply unsettling. Her side of the room was a curated chaos, a stark contrast to my own meticulously organized space. Books were piled in teetering stacks, clothes were draped over her chair rather than hung in the closet, and her desk was a fascinating jumble of sketchbooks, half-empty tea mugs, and those smooth, mysterious stones. Yet, there was a strange kind of order to her disorder, an aesthetic to her messiness that I, a devotee of labels and lists, found both perplexing and undeniably intriguing. I began to learn her habit, the small, unconscious rituals that made up her day, the way she would sit cross-legged on her bed for hours, lost in a book, one hand idly twisting a strand of her dark, unruly hair. The low, humming sound she would make, almost a purr, when she was sketching, her brow furrowed in concentration, her tongue caught lightly between her teeth. The way she always slept on her stomach, one arm flung out, her face half buried in the pillow, looking surprisingly vulnerable, almost childlike in repose. Her scent, that intoxicating blend of old books and cinnamon, became a constant, subtle presence in our shared space. It clung to her clothes, to her bedding, to the very air we breathed. Sometimes I would walk into the room after she had just left, and her fragrance would linger, a ghostly imprint of her presence that would make my heart perform a strange, unwilling little flip. I started to notice The small details of her physicality, things I had no business noticing, things that made me feel like a traitor to my own carefully constructed identity. The way a tiny, almost invisible scar curved just above her left eyebrow, a faint white line against her olive skin, the delicate tracery of blue veins on the inside of her wrists, the surprisingly long, elegant fingers that wielded a charcoal pencil with such confident grace, the way her dark lashes, ridiculously long and thick, would cast feathery shadows on her cheekbones when she looked down. These observations were like tiny, illicit sparks igniting a strange, unfamiliar heat within me, a heat I tried to douse with rational thought, with reminders of Tom, of my unwavering, unshakable straightness. But the sparks persisted, glowing embers in the darkness of my confusion. One evening I was struggling with a particularly dense passage of Chaucer for my English lit class, the Middle English, a frustrating, almost impenetrable barrier. I must have sighed aloud, a sound of pure, unadulterated exasperation, because Kara looked up from her sketchbook, her gray eyes questioning, "Everything okay?" she asked, her voice that low, husky timbre that always seemed to vibrate somewhere deep inside me. "Just Chaucer," I grumbled, running a hand through my hair in frustration. "It's like trying to decipher an alien language." She was silent for a moment, her gaze fixed on me, and then, to my surprise, she began to speak, her voice soft, melodic, reciting the opening lines of the Canterbury Tales in a flawless, resonant Middle English that was both beautiful and utterly, unexpectedly erotic. "When that April, with his surest suit, the drought of March hath pursaid to the root," I stared at her, mesmerized, the sound of the ancient words, spoken in her rich, evocative voice, washing over me like a warm, intoxicating wave. She wasn't just reciting, she was inhabiting the language, her eyes half closed, a faint, almost trance-like expression on her face. It was as if she had been transported to another time, another place, and for a few breathtaking moments, she took me with her. When she finished, the silence in the room was thick, charged with an unspoken magic. She opened her eyes, and they met mine, a faint, self-deprecating smile playing on her lips. "My dad was a medieval lit professor," she explained, as if that somehow accounted for the spell she had just woven. "He used to read it to me as a bedtime story." Bedtime stories. Chaucer. Suddenly, my own carefully curated, color-coded world felt bland, predictable, utterly devoid of the strange, captivating magic that seemed to emanate from this enigmatic creature who shared my dorm room. That was amazing. I managed my voice a little shaky. "You made it sound beautiful." "It is beautiful," she said softly, her gaze holding mine. "You just have to listen to the music in it." The music in it. I felt a sudden, inexplicable urge to cry. A wave of emotion so strong, so unexpected that it almost overwhelmed me. It wasn't just about the poetry. It was about her, about the way she had, with a few simple words, a few resonant lines, cracked open a window in my carefully constructed world, letting in a rush of unfamiliar, unsettling, and undeniably beautiful air. I quickly looked away, busying myself with my textbook, my cheeks burning, my heart pounding. This was getting dangerous. This fascination, this admiration, this strange, unsettling pull I felt towards her, it was veering into territory I didn't understand, territory I wasn't equipped to navigate. I needed to regain control, to reassert the boundaries, to remind myself of who I was, of what I wanted. But as I stared blindly at the incomprehensible lines of Chaucer, the echo of Kara's voice, the memory of her stormy gray eyes, the intoxicating scent of old books and cinnamon lingered, a persistent, beautiful, terrifying melody that refused to be silenced. The Chaucer incident, as I mentally dubbed it, marked a subtle but significant shift in the undercurrents of our cohabitation. It wasn't just her physical presence that I was now hyper aware of. It was her mind, her quiet intelligence, the unexpected depths that lay beneath her cool, enigmatic surface. This new dimension to my fascination made it even harder to dismiss, even more difficult to reconcile with my carefully constructed identity. I found myself seeking out opportunities for conversation, not just the perfunctory roommate exchanges, but real talks, the kind that stretched into the late hours, fueled by lukewarm tea and a shared, unspoken curiosity. These conversations were a revelation. Kara, it turned out, had a mind like a magpie's nest, filled with glittering, eclectic treasures, obscure philosophical theories, half-forgotten historical anecdotes, a surprisingly encyclopedic knowledge of 70s punk rock, and a deep, abiding passion for astrophysics. She spoke about black holes and existentialism with the same quiet intensity she had brought to Chaucer, her gray eyes lighting up, her hands moving in expressive, unconscious gestures. And I, in turn, found myself sharing my own passions, my love for Victorian novels, my fascination with etymology, my secret half-formed ambition to write something, anything that mattered. She was a surprisingly good listener, her gaze attentive, her questions insightful, never judgmental. With her, I felt seen, understood. In a way that Tom, with his easygoing, uncomplicated affection, had never made me feel. These late-night talks became a sanctuary, a secret, intimate space carved out of the institutional anonymity of dorm life. We'd sit on the floor, our backs against our respective beds, the room lit only by the dim glow of a desk lamp, the rest of the dormitory silent, asleep, and in that hushed, crepuscular world, the boundaries between us seemed to blur, to become more. Sometimes our knees would brush, a fleeting, accidental contact that would send a jolt of electricity through me, a sensation that was becoming increasingly, alarmingly familiar. Sometimes her gaze would linger on mine a moment too long, her eyes dark and unreadable in the dim light, and I would feel my breath catch, my heart perform that familiar, unsettling acrobatics. I started to notice the way she looked at me, really looked at me, when I was talking about something I was passionate about. There was an intensity in her gaze, a focused attention that made me feel both incredibly vulnerable and strangely empowered. It was as if she were drinking me in, absorbing my words, my gestures, my very essence, and the thought, as terrifying as it was also undeniably, intoxicatingly seductive. One night, we were talking about fear, about the things that kept us awake at night. I confessed my fear of failure, of not living up to my own and my parents' expectations. She listened patiently, her expression unreadable, and then she shared her own fear, a fear so profound, so unexpected, that it left me speechless. "I'm afraid," she said, her voice barely a whisper, her gaze fixed on some distant point beyond the confines of our small room, of being invisible, of going through life without ever really connecting with anyone, without ever leaving a mark. Her vulnerability, so raw, so unexpected, was like a punch to the gut. This enigmatic, self-possessed creature who seemed so indifferent to the opinions of others was afraid of being unseen, of being alone. In that moment, the last vestiges of my carefully constructed defenses crumbled. I saw her not as the cool, aloof roommate, not as the object of my confusing, forbidden desires, but as a person, a fragile, complex, beautiful human being with her own hidden hurts, her own secret longings, and the wave of emotion that washed over me was so strong, so overwhelming, that it almost brought tears to my eye. It wasn't just fascination anymore. It wasn't just admiration. It was something deeper, something more profound, something that felt dangerously, terrifyingly like empathy, affection, or was it something else entirely? Something I didn't yet have a name for. Without thinking, I reached out and placed my hand on hers, where it rested on the worn carpet between us. Her skin was cool, surprisingly soft. She didn't pull away. Instead, her fingers, those long, elegant fingers that could wield a charcoal pencil with such grace, curled around mine, her grip surprisingly strong, almost desperate. We sat like that for a long moment, our hands clasped together, the silence in the room, thick with unspoken emotions, with a dawning, terrifying, exhilarating awareness. The rain had stopped, and the first faint hints of dawn were beginning to seep through the grimy window, painting the room in shades of gray and lavender. The spell was broken by the distant, jarring clang of an alarm clock from a neighboring room, a brutal reminder of the outside world, of the lives we were supposed to be living. Kara's hand slipped from mine, the loss of that contact surprisingly sharp, leaving my own hand feeling cold and empty. She looked away, a faint flush rising on her cheeks, her usual enigmatic mask slowly reasserting itself. I should probably get some sleep, she mumbled, her voice a little hoarse. Yeah, I agreed, my own voice equally unsteady. Me too. But as I crawled into my narrow bed, the image of her face in the pre-dawn light, her eyes filled with that raw, aching vulnerability, the feel of her hand clasped in mine, lingered, a persistent, beautiful, terrifying presence. The carefully ordered garden of my life was in ruins, its neat rows overturned, its familiar landmarks obliterated. And in their place, something new, something wild and untamed was beginning to take root, a strange, beautiful, terrifying flower whose name I didn't yet know, but whose intoxicating fragrance was already beginning to consume me. The shared vulnerability of that late night conversation, the unexpected clasping of our hands, had irrevocably altered the dynamic between Kara and me. The polite distance we had maintained for the first few months was gone, replaced by a new, charged intimacy, a constant awareness of each other that hummed beneath the surface of our daily interactions. It was a dangerous, exhilarating dance, this silent, unspoken acknowledgement of the connection that was growing between us. We still hadn't named it, hadn't dared to even hint at its true nature, but it was there, a palpable force in the small, shared space of our dorm room. I found myself manufacturing excuses to be near her, to prolong our conversations, to create opportunities for those fleeting, accidental touches that sent shivers of illicit pleasure coursing through me. I'd ask for her help with a particularly difficult passage in a book I knew she'd read, just to watch the way her brow furrowed in concentration as she explained it to me, her face close to mine, her breath warm against my cheek. I'd accidentally leave my favorite mug in her side of the room, just so I'd have an excuse to linger there for a moment, to breathe in her scent, to absorb the unique, captivating atmosphere of her curated chaos. These were small, almost pathetic subterfuges I knew, but I couldn't help I was like a moth drawn to a flame that was both beautiful and terrifyingly, deliciously dangerous. And Kara played her part in this silent, escalating drama with a subtlety that was both maddening and intoxicating. She never initiated these moments of heightened intimacy, not overtly, but she didn't discourage them either. She would meet my gaze, her stormy gray eyes holding mine for a fraction of a second too long, a silent acknowledgement of the unspoken. She would let her hand linger when it brushed against mine, a fleeting, almost imperceptible pressure that sent my heart racing. She would smile that enigmatic, half-hidden smile, the one that always made me feel as if she knew exactly what was going on inside my head, as if she were privy to the secret, tumultuous landscape of my desires. One afternoon, I was sketching in my notebook, a clumsy, amateurish attempt to capture the way the late afternoon sun fell across the jumble of books on her desk, when she came and stood behind me. Looking over my shoulder, I hadn't heard her approach, and her sudden proximity made me jump, my pencil skittering across the page, ruining the drawing. Sorry, she murmured, her voice a low, husky caress close to my ear. Didn't mean to startle you. Her breath, warm and smelling faintly of the peppermint tea she was always drinking, fanned across my neck, sending a shiver down my spine. I could feel the warmth of her body radiating against my back, even through the layers of our clothes. It's okay, I managed, my voice a little breathless. It wasn't very good anyway. No, it was, she said softly, her gaze fixed on the ruined sketch. You have a good eye. You see things. She paused, and then, her voice dropping even lower, almost to a whisper, she added, You see me. My heart stopped. Then it started again, hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. She saw me, she knew, she understood. The air between us crackled, thick with unspoken emotions, with a dawning, terrifying, exhilarating awareness. I wanted to turn around, to look into her eyes, to confirm what I thought I had just heard, what I desperately hoped I had just heard. But I couldn't move. I was frozen, transfixed, caught in the intoxicating spell of her proximity, of her words. Her hand came to rest on my shoulder, a light, almost tentative touch, yet it felt like a brand, searing my skin, sending an explosion of sensation through my entire body. Her fingers, those long, elegant fingers, gently kneaded the tense muscle at the base of my neck, a slow, hypnotic rhythm that made me want to sigh, to melt, to surrender completely. You're always so tense, Lena, she whispered, her lips brushing against my hair, sending a fresh wave of shivers through me. You need to learn to relax, to let go, let go. The words echoed in my mind, a seductive, dangerous invitation. Let go of what? My fears? My inhibitions? My carefully constructed identity? The very foundations of the life I had always known? It was too much, too fast, too terrifying. I pulled away, abruptly, my chair scraping harshly against the wooden floor, shattering the fragile intimacy of the moment. I have to study, I stammered, my cheeks burning, my heart pounding. I couldn't look at her. I couldn't bear to see the expression in her eyes, the knowing glint that I was sure would be there. I grabbed my textbook, a random unopened volume, and fled the room, escaping to the relative anonymity of the library, my mind a maelstrom of conflicting emotions, desire, fear, shame, and a wild, reckless, undeniable excitement. The encounter, her words, her touch had pushed me closer to the edge than I had ever been before. The carefully constructed walls I had built around my heart, around my desires, were crumbling, and I didn't know if I had the strength or the will to rebuild them. The flame was no longer just a flicker. It was a roaring inferno, threatening to consume me completely. And the most terrifying part, a part of me, a reckless, desperate part, wanted to let it burn. The near confession in our room, Maya's hand on my shoulder, her breath against my hair, the terrifying, exhilarating suggestion that I let go. It all replayed in my mind on an endless loop. My escape to the library had been a flight of panic, a desperate attempt to outrun the truth that was chasing me, the truth that was her. But the library, with its hushed silence and its dusty academic air, offered no sanctuary. Her scent seemed to cling to my clothes, her voice echoed in my ears, the memory of her touch, a persistent, distracting hum beneath the surface of my thoughts. I try to focus on my work, on the intricacies of Renaissance poetry, on the upcoming midterms that loomed like a guillotine. But every line I read, every note I took, seemed to lead back to her. A love sonnet became a coded message about forbidden desire. A tragic heroine's lament became a reflection of my own internal turmoil. She was everywhere, in everything. I was losing myself, my carefully constructed identity dissolving like mist in the morning sun. The Lena who was straight, who had a boyfriend named Tom, who had her future neatly mapped out, was becoming a stranger, a ghost from a life that no longer felt real. And in her place, a new Lena was emerging. A Lena who was confused, terrified, and undeniably, irrevocably drawn to the enigmatic creature who shared her dorm room. The tension between us in the days that followed was almost unbearable. We moved around each other with a new, heightened awareness, a careful, almost painful choreography of avoidance and attraction. We spoke in clipped, polite sentences, our eyes rarely meeting, yet the air between us crackled with unspoken emotions, with the memory of that almost moment of the words that had been left hanging, unfinished, in the charged silence. Sometimes I would catch her looking at me, her stormy gray eyes filled with an expression I couldn't decipher. Curiosity, longing, regret, or was it just my own overwrought imagination, projecting my own desperate hopes onto her impassive, enigmatic face? I started to have trouble sleeping. I'd lie in my narrow bed, staring up at the darkened ceiling, my mind racing, my body alive with a restless, unfamiliar energy. I'd hear her moving around in her own bed, just a few feet away, the soft rustle of sheets, the occasional sigh, and my imagination would run wild, conjuring images of her, of us, that left me breathless and aching with a desire so intense, it was almost a physical pain. Tom called his voice a cheerful, uncomplicated presence from a world that felt increasingly distant, almost unreal. He talked about his classes, his friends, the upcoming football game, and I listened, offering the expected responses, the polite affirmations, but my mind was elsewhere, lost in the labyrinth of my own confusing, forbidden desire. When he asked if I missed him, I said, yes, of course I did. But the word felt hollow, a lie, a betrayal of the truth that was slowly, terrifyingly dawning within me. I missed the idea of him, perhaps. The idea of the life I was supposed to want, the life I had always assumed I would have. But did I miss him? The actual, tangible person? I wasn't so sure anymore. The guilt was a constant gnawing companion. Guilt towards Tom for my emotional infidelity. Guilt towards Chloe for the secret, illicit nature of my feelings for her roommate. Guilt towards myself for the betrayal of my own carefully constructed identity, for the desires that felt so wrong, so alien, yet so undeniably, terrifyingly real. One evening, I was in the communal bathroom, brushing my teeth, trying to avoid my own reflection in the cracked, water-stained mirror when Maya walked in. She was wearing a pair of ridiculously short pajama shorts and one of her faded band t-shirts, her dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, her face scrubbed clean of makeup. She looked young, vulnerable, and utterly, devastatingly beautiful. She didn't speak, just moved to the sink beside mine, her presence a sudden, intense heat in the cool, tiled space. I could smell her, that intoxicating blend of soap and sleep and something uniquely Maya, a fragrance that made my head swim, my knees feel weak. I tried to concentrate on brushing my teeth, on the mundane, mechanical inaction, but my awareness of her was overwhelming. I could feel her gaze on me, a sidelong, unreadable scrutiny. I risked a glance at her in the mirror. Our eyes met, and for a long, charged moment, neither of us looked away. The air between us crackled, thick with unspoken emotions, with the memory of that afternoon in our room, of her hand on my shoulder, of her whispered invitation to let go. Her lips, slightly swollen from sleep, parted as if she were about to speak. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, desperate rhythm. Was this it? Was she going to say something? Acknowledge what was happening between us? But then the moment was broken. The bathroom door swung open, and another girl from our floor walked in, her face covered in a thick green beauty mask, her eyes wide and curious as she took in the tableau before her, me and Maya, standing frozen at the sinks, our eyes locked, the air between us vibrating with an almost visible tension. Maya blinked, the spell shattered. She quickly turned back to the sink, a faint flush rising on her cheek. I mumbled a hasty goodnight and fled the bathroom, my toothbrush still clutched in my hand, my heart pounding, my mind reeling. The encounter, as brief and inconclusive as it had been, had only served to heighten the already unbearable tension. It was clear that this couldn't go on. This silent, agonizing dance of avoidance and attraction, of unspoken desires and unacknowledged truths. Something had to give, something had to break, and I was terrified, desperately exhilarating, terrified of what would happen when it did. The dorm room, once a neutral territory, had become a battleground for my senses, every corner infused with Maya's presence, every shared silence ringing with unspoken words. The bathroom encounter, that charged, interrupted moment, had left an indelible mark. It was like a silent dare had been issued, a challenge to the precarious equilibrium we'd been trying to maintain. I found myself replaying it, her sleepy vulnerability, the way her eyes had held mine in the mirror, the sudden, almost painful awareness that had arced between us. It wasn't just attraction anymore, it was a deeper, more unsettling current pulling me towards an unknown shore. My dreams became more vivid, more explicit, filled with images of her, her stormy gray eyes, her enigmatic smile, the feel of her skin beneath my fingertips. I'd wake in the pre-dawn darkness, my heart pounding, my body aching with a desire so intense it felt like a physical wound, the sheets tangled around me, the lingering scent of her, real or imagined, filling my senses. The line between fantasy and reality was blurring, my carefully constructed world tilting precariously on its axis. I tried to focus on my studies, to lose myself in the intricate beauty of Shakespearean sonnets, in the dense, challenging prose of modernist novels. But even there, I found echoes of her, of us. Every story of forbidden love, every poem about unrequited longing seemed to speak directly to my own tormented heart, Tom called less frequently now, his cheerful, uncomplicated voice, a jarring reminder of the life I was supposed to be living, the person I was supposed to be. Our conversations felt strained, artificial, punctuated by long, awkward silences. He sensed the distance, I knew, though he didn't understand its cause. He attributed it to the stress of college, to the newness of it all, and I let him too cowardly, too confused to articulate the truth, a truth I was only just beginning to acknowledge to myself. One particularly grueling week of midterms left me exhausted, frayed, my nerves stretched taut as a violin string. I'd been subsisting on caffeine and anxiety, pulling all-nighters in the library, my brain a foggy, overwhelmed mess. Friday night arrived, and with it, the promise of a blessed temporary reprieve. Chloe, our other roommate, had gone home for the weekend, leaving just Maya and me in the quiet, almost eerie emptiness of our floor. I stumbled back to the dorm room late that evening, my bag heavy with textbooks, my body aching, my mind a numb, exhausted blank. All I wanted was a hot shower and the oblivion of sleep. Maya was there, curled up on her bed with a book, the soft glow of her reading lamp casting a warm, inviting circle of light in the otherwise dim room. She looked up as I entered, her gray eyes softening with a concern that took me by surprise. "Rough week?" she asked, her voice, that low, husky timbre that always seemed to bypass my defenses and resonate somewhere deep inside me. "You look shattered." Understatement of the year, I mumbled, dropping my bag to the floor with a weary thud. "I think my brain has officially short-circuited." She smiled, a genuine, sympathetic smile that made my heart ache with a strange, unfamiliar tenderness. "Go take a shower," she said softly. "You'll feel better. I'll make you some tea." A shower. The thought was like a beacon of hope in the foggy landscape of my exhaustion. A long, hot shower where I could wash away the grime of the week, the stress, the anxiety, the everything. I gathered my towel and a change of clothes, my movements slow, leaden. The communal bathroom was thankfully empty. I turned the shower on, the water pressure disappointingly weak, but the heat was a blessed relief. I stepped under the spray, letting the hot water cascade over my tired body, closing my eyes, a long, shuddering sigh escaping my lip. The steam filled the small cubicle, cocooning me in a warm, moist embrace. A temporary escape from the relentless assault of my thoughts, my emotions, my desires. I stood there for a long time, just letting the water sluice over me, trying to wash away the exhaustion, the confusion, her. But even here, in the anonymous sanctuary of the shower, she was present. Her scent, that intoxicating blend of old books and cinnamon, seemed to be woven into the very fabric of the steam, her image flickering behind my closed eyelids, her voice echoing in the rhythmic drumming of the water. I was soaping my hair, my head tilted back, my eyes still closed, lost in a hazy, waterlogged reverie, when I heard the shower curtain twitch. I froze, my heart leaping into my throat. My eyes snapped open, and there she was, Maya, standing just inside the shower cubicle, the curtain pulled partially closed behind her, her dark hair already plastered to her forehead, her clothes, a simple t-shirt and shorts, clinging to her body, already soaked through. Her gray eyes, dark and luminous in the steamy dimness, were fixed on mine, filled with an expression I couldn't decipher. Curiosity, concern, or something else entirely, something that made my breath catch, my entire body jolt with a sudden powerful surge of awareness. "Maya?" I whispered, my voice a hoarse, incredulous croak. What are you doing?" She didn't speak. She just looked at me, her gaze unwavering, intense, as if she were trying to read my very soul. The water cascaded around us, a warm, insistent presence, drumming against the tiled walls, against our skin. The air was thick with steam, with unspoken emotions, with a tension so palpable it was almost unbearable. And then she moved slowly, deliberately. She reached out, her hand, cool and wet, coming to rest on my bare shoulder. Her touch was electric, a jolt that shot through me, from the point of contact down to the very tips of my toes, leaving a trail of searing heat in its wake. My breath hitched. My heart hammered against my ribs, a wild, frantic rhythm. This was it, the moment I had both dreaded and craved, the point of no return. "You looked," she said finally, her voice a low, husky whisper that was barely audible above the drumming of the water. Like you needed someone. And then, before I could respond, before I could think, before I could breathe, she leaned in, her eyes never leaving mine, and her lips, cool and wet from the shower, found mine. The world tilted, dissolved, reformed. The drumming of the water, the steamy heat, the cool tiles beneath my feet, it all faded into insignificance. There was only this, her mouth on mine, her hand on my shoulder sending shivers of illicit pleasure through my already sensitized skin, the scent of her amplified by the steam, by our proximity, overwhelming my senses. Her lips were soft at first, tentative, a question. And then, as I responded, as my own lips parted, as my body, with a will of its own, leaned into hers, the kiss deepened, becoming more urgent, more demanding. It was a kiss of shared exhaustion, of unspoken longing, of a connection that defied logic, that defied convention, that defied everything I had ever known or thought I had known about myself. Her other hand came up to cup my face, her fingers tangling in my wet hair, tilting my head, deepening the kiss. I could feel the lean strength of her body pressed against mine, her clothes soaked through, offering no barrier to the heat that was rapidly building between us. The thin cotton of her t-shirt clung to her, revealing the curve of her breasts, the outline of her nipples, and my own hands, as if with a will of their own, came up to rest on her waist, my fingers spreading out, exploring the warm, wet fabric, the yielding flesh beneath. A soft moan escaped her lips, muffled against mine, a sound of pure, unadulterated surrender. And in that moment, surrounded by steam and water and the intoxicating reality of her embrace, I knew that the earthquake that had begun with a subtle tremor on a mundane Tuesday morning had finally, irrevocably hit. The carefully cultivated garden of my life was in ruins, and in its place, something wild, something beautiful, something terrifyingly, exhilaratingly new was about to bloom. The initial shock of Maya's presence, of her lips on mine, gave way to a dizzying, overwhelming surge of sensation. The shower cubicle, usually a mundane, utilitarian space, transformed into a steamy, intimate sanctuary, a world unto itself, where the only realities were the cascading water, the heat of our bodies, and the desperate, urgent hunger that consumed us. Her mouth was an exploration, a revelation. Her lips, cool and wet at first, quickly warmed, molding against mine with a practiced, intoxicating confidence. Her tongue, tentative for a heartbeat, then bolder, delved into my mouth, a silken, knowing invader that mapped the sensitive contours, igniting fires I hadn't known existed. I responded with an answering hunger, my own tongue meeting hers in a desperate, urgent dance, a silent, passionate conversation that transcended words. The water sluiced over us, a warm, insistent caress, plastering her dark hair to her forehead, her t-shirt clinging to her like a second skin, revealing the tantalizing outline of her breasts, the curve of her stomach. My hands, which had been resting on her waist, began their own exploration, sliding up her back, feeling the lean, strong muscles beneath the soaked cotton, the delicate tracery of her spine. Her skin was slick, warm, incredibly alive beneath my touch. She pulled back, just slightly, her breath coming in ragged gasps, her stormy gray eyes, dark and luminous in the steamy dimness, fixed on mine. "Lena," she whispered, her voice a low, husky caress, my name on her lips, a prayer, a plea, an incantation. I shouldn't have. Her words were a token protest, a last, fleeting nod to the boundaries we were so spectacularly demolishing, but there was no conviction in her voice, no real attempt to pull away. If anything, her body pressed closer, her hips moving in a slow, sinuous rhythm against mine that sent a fresh wave of heat crashing through me. "Don't," I breathed, my own voice, equally unsteady, my fingers tightening their grip on her waist, pulling her even closer. "Don't stop," and she didn't. She kissed me again, a hard, desperate kiss that tasted of soap and longing and the bittersweet tang of forbidden desire. Her hands moved from my face, sliding down my neck, her fingers tracing the line of my collarbone, sending shivers of anticipation cascading through me. One hand found its way to my breast, her palm cupping the fullness, her thumb brushing against my nipple through the thin, wet fabric of my own imagined covering, though in reality, I was already bare from the shower I'd been taking. The sensation was electric, a jolt that made me gasp against her mouth, my body arching into her touch. The water continued to drum around us, a relentless, primal rhythm that seemed to sync with the frantic beat of our hearts. The steam swirled, cocooning us in a private, hazy world, blurring the edges of reality, making everything feel dreamlike, surreal. But this was no dream. This was real. This was happening. Maya's mouth left mine, trailing a path of fire down my jawline to the sensitive hollow of my throat, her lips and tongue teasing, tormenting, eliciting soft, involuntary moans from my lips. I tilted my head back, granting her access, a gesture of complete and utter surrender. Her hands were busy, unlearning the lines of propriety, her fingers fumbling with the hem of her own soaked t-shirt, pulling it up over her head in a single, decisive movement. She tossed it aside, the wet fabric landing with a soft slap on the tiled floor, and then she was bare-chested before me, her skin glistening in the steamy light, her breasts full and firm, their nipples dark, erect, beaded with droplets of water. She was beautiful, achingly, breathtakingly beautiful, a pagan water nymph, a creature of myth and legend, come to life in the mundane reality of a communal dorm shower. My breath caught in my throat. My gaze raked over her, a slow, appreciative appraisal that sent a fresh wave of heat coursing through my veins. I reached out, my hand trembling slightly, and cupped one of her breasts, its weight a perfect, satisfying reality in my palm. Her skin was incredibly soft, the nipple hard and responsive beneath my touch. She gasped, a sharp, indrawn breath, her eyes fluttering closed, her head falling back against the cool, tiled wall. "Alex," she breathed, her voice a ragged, broken plea. The sound of my name on her lips, spoken with such raw, unadulterated pleasure, was the most erotic thing I had ever heard. It shattered the last vestiges of my control. I lowered my head, my mouth finding her breast, my tongue tracing the outline of her nipple, then laving, suckling, gently at first, then with increasing urgency. She cried out, a raw, keening sound that was swallowed by the drumming of the water, her fingers tangling in my wet hair, her hips bucking against mine in a frantic, desperate rhythm. The world narrowed to this single, incandescent point of contact, to the feel of her body moving beneath mine, to the sound of her ragged breathing, to the intoxicating scent of her arousal. Nothing else mattered. There was only this fierce, desperate, beautiful act of mutual surrender. Her shorts, soaked and clinging, were the next to go, her hands working with mine in a fumbling, eager urgency until they too were discarded, joining her t-shirt on the tiled floor. And then we were skin to skin, flesh to flesh, the water cascading over our entwined bodies, a warm, insistent caress. The sensation was overwhelming, intoxicating, a symphony of heat and moisture and yielding flesh. Her hands were everywhere, exploring, learning, her touch both tender and demanding, coaxing from me a response that was both a surrender and a triumph. I was lost in a maelstrom of sensation, my body arching and writhing beneath her touch, my breath coming in ragged gasps, my mind a blissful, empty void. This was a new language, a new world, a new self, and Maya was my guide, my teacher, my partner in this reckless, beautiful, terrifying exploration of a desire I hadn't known I possessed, a desire that was now consuming me, body and soul, in the steamy, secret sanctuary of a shared shower. The confines of the shower stall became our universe, a world bounded by tile and steam, by the rush of water and the urgent press of our body. Maya's exploration of me was as intoxicating as my own discovery of her. Her fingers, slick with water and soap, traced paths of fire across my skin, awakening nerve endings I hadn't known existed. Her lips, her tongue were a constant, tormenting presence, leaving no part of me untouched, unkissed, unaroused. When her hand slid lower, parting the wet curls between my thighs, her fingers finding the slick, swollen folds of my sex, a jolt of pure, unadulterated pleasure shot through me, so intense, it almost buckled my knees. I cried out, my voice a raw, strangled sound, my hands clutching at her shoulders for support, my body arching into her touch, a desperate, silent plea for more. Her touch was knowing, confident, her fingers moving with a skill, a precision that belied any assumption of inexperience. She knew what I wanted, what I needed, perhaps even before I did, and she gave it to me. Generously, unreservedly, her touch both tender and demanding, coaxing from me a response that was both a surrender and a fierce, untamed assertion of my own burgeoning desire. The waters sluiced over us, a warm, insistent curtain, veiling our actions, amplifying our sensations. The steam swirled, cocooning us in a private, hazy world, blurring the edges of reality, making everything feel dreamlike, surreal. But this was no dream. This was real. This was happening. My own hands were not idle. They roamed her body, learning its contours, its textures, its hidden sensitivities. Her skin was incredibly responsive, every touch eliciting a gasp, a moan, a subtle shift of her hips that told me I was on the right path. I explored the curve of her waist, the gentle swell of her stomach, the surprisingly strong muscles in her thighs. My fingers, emboldened by her responses, by the raw, untamed hunger that consumed us both, found their way to the heart of her, to the slick, hidden core of her pleasure. She cried out, her voice a high, keening sound, her body arching against mine, her nails digging into my shoulders, leaving fiery trails in their wake. The power dynamic, if there had ever been one, dissolved completely. We were equals in the stance of desire, two souls stripped bare, literally and metaphorically, consumed by a mutual hunger, a shared, desperate need. The tension in the small, steamy space was almost unbearable, a tightly coiled spring of anticipation, of an almost painful pleasure. Our breath came in short, sharp gasps, our bodies trembling, our hearts hammering in frantic, synchronized rhythm. The world outside, with its rules, its judgments, its inevitable consequences, had ceased to exist. There was only this fierce, desperate, beautiful act of mutual discovery, of shared surrender. And then I felt it, the first subtle tremor in her body, the telltale clenching of her inner muscles, the sharp indrawn breath that signaled her approaching release. It was like a signal to my own body, a cue that it was safe to let go, to surrender to the overwhelming tide of sensation that was crashing through me. With a final, desperate surge of movement, a guttural cry torn from my own throat, a cry that was echoed by her own, I followed her over the edge, into the abyss of oblivion, the world exploding in a blinding flash of white-hot pleasure, a shattering, transcendent release that left me gasping, trembling, clinging to her as if she were the only solid thing in a universe that had just been ripped apart and reassembled. The aftershocks rippled through us for long, shuddering moments, our bodies still intimately entwined, slick with sweat and water, our breath coming in ragged, uneven gasps. The shower spray, now feeling cooler against our overheated skin, continued its relentless, indifferent drumming. A profound, bone-deep weariness settled over me, a languid, delicious exhaustion that left my limbs feeling heavy, my mind blissfully empty. I sagged against Maya, my head resting in the damp hollow of her shoulder, her arms coming around me, holding me close, her heartbeat a slow, steady rhythm beneath my ear, a comforting counterpoint to the fading thunder of my own. We stood like that for a long time, wrapped in a cocoon of shared intimacy, the silence in the stall broken only by the soft sound of our breathing and the relentless drumming of the water. There were no words. None were needed. Everything that had needed to be said had been spoken in the silent, eloquent language of our bodies, in the raw, uninhibited expression of our shared desire. As the last vestiges of the orgasm receded and the first faint hints of a dawning awareness began to seep through the intoxicating haze of passion, a new, more unsettling reality began to assert itself. The steam was beginning to dissipate, the water feeling colder, the tiles hard and unforgiving beneath my feet. The magic of the moment, so potent, so overwhelming, was starting to fade, replaced by a dawning, uncomfortable consciousness of what we had done, of the lines we had crossed, of the irrevocable nature of our shared transgression, a cold knot of anxiety began to form in my stomach, a stark contrast to the lingering warmth that still suffused my body. This was Maya, my roommate. This was a communal dorm shower. This was a secret, a dangerous, thrilling, terrifying secret. What now? The question hung in the air, unspoken but palpable, a heavy, ominous cloud that threatened to eclipse the fragile beauty of what we had just shared. I could feel Maya stir beside me, her body tensing slightly, as if she, too, were grappling with the dawning implications of our action. The shared intimacy, so raw and uninhibited just moments before, was now tinged with a new, uncertain awkwardness. The journey back from the shower, back to our room, was a blur of damp towels, averted gazes, and a silence so thick it felt like a physical entity. The small beige dorm room, usually a space of mundane routine, now seemed charged with an entirely new energy. Every object, every shadow, imbued with the memory of what had just transpired between us. We didn't speak as we dried ourselves, as we pulled on fresh clothes. The air was heavy with unspoken words, with the weight of our shared secret. I avoided her eyes, not out of shame, not entirely, but out of a kind of dazed, incredulous awe mixed with a healthy dose of terror. Had that really happened? Had I really just with Maya? My roommate, the girl I had sworn I was straight before? The questions swirled in my mind, a chaotic, unanswerable jumble. Maya was equally quiet, her movements slow, deliberate, her expression unreadable. The enigmatic mask was firmly back in place, though I thought I detected a new softness around her eyes, a lingering vulnerability in the slight tremor of her hands as she combed her wet hair. We crawled into our respective beds, the narrow space between them suddenly feeling like a vast, yawning chasm. The room was dark, the only light, the faint, orange glow from the streetlights outside, filtering through the grimy window. The silence stretched, taut and fragile, broken only by the soft sound of our breathing. I lay there, staring up at the darkened ceiling, my body still humming with the aftershocks of our shared passion, my mind reeling. The scent of her, of soap and steam and sex, seemed to cling to my skin, to my hair, to the very air I breathed. It was an intoxicating, unforgettable fragrance, a permanent imprint on my senses. After what felt like an eternity, she spoke, her voice a low, hesitant whisper in the darkness. "Lena?" "Yeah?" I replied, my own voice equally soft, equally uncertain. Another long silence, filled with unspoken emotions, with the weight of our shared transgression. Then, are you okay? Her question, so simple, so mundane, yet so laden with unspoken meaning, was like a key unlocking a floodgate within me. Tears pricked at my eyes, hot and unexpected. I don't know, I whispered, the admission, a raw, painful truth. I don't know what I am. I heard her shift in her bed, the soft rustle of sheets. "Me neither," she said, her voice barely audible. "But last night, the shower, it wasn't, I don't regret it. Do you regret it?" The thought was a foreign country, a land I hadn't even considered visiting. It had been terrifying, yes, confusing, absolutely, but regrettable? No, it had been a revelation, a shattering, beautiful, terrifying revelation. "No," I whispered, the word a fierce, defiant affirmation in the darkness. "No, I don't regret it." A small, shaky sigh escaped her lips, a sound of relief, of something else. "Good," she said softly, "because I think I'm falling for you, Lena." Her words so unexpected, so direct, so terrifyingly, exhilaratingly honest, hit me with the force of a physical blow. My breath caught in my throat, my heart hammered against my ribs. She was falling for me, Maya, my roommate, the enigmatic, captivating creature who had turned my world upside down, who had shown me a part of myself I hadn't known existed, and the most terrifying, most beautiful, most undeniable truth of all, I was falling for her too. "Maya," I breathed, her name, a prayer, a promise, a declaration. I think I'm falling for you too." The silence that followed was different. Not tense, not awkward, but filled with a new, fragile, breathtaking sense of possibility. The earthquake had hit, the garden was in ruins, but in the rubble, something new, something wild, something beautiful was beginning to grow. And as I lay there in the darkness, the scent of her still clinging to my skin, a small, tentative smile touched my lip. I still didn't know who I was, not entirely. But for the first time in my life, the uncertainty didn't feel terrifying. It felt like an adventure. An adventure I was about to embark on, hand in hand with the enigmatic, captivating creature who had pulled me into the shower and into a world I hadn't known I was missing.